Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Hippocratic Oath, which is episode 3 of season 4 of Star Trek DS9. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek DS9 one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th-season episode Hippocratic Oath. So Hippocratic Oath is the episode in which Bashir and O'Brien respond to a distress call in the Delta Quadrant, but they find that they're Jem'hadar on the planet that then take them captive, and Brian thinks that they're about to die. However, the lead Jem'hadar, the first, wants Bashir to do some scientific research because they learn that this particular Jem'hadar is free from the drug that we learn in this episode is called katracel white, that the founders used to addict the Jem'hadar in order to ensure loyalty. And now, because he's free of the drug, he's starting to question the founders and question the purpose of the Dominion, and wants to break off from the Dominion, and he's trying to get his troop free of the katracel white. So he wants Bashir to discover a cure because he believes it has something to do with the planet. However, O'Brien just wants to escape. He wants Bashir not to help them, but Bashir is the ranking officer, and he orders O'Brien to help him get the devices that he needs. However, O'Brien disobeys orders and attacks the Jem'hadar and tries to free Bashir. When Bashir refuses to leave, he goes as far as to destroy Bashir's work. But then the Jem'hadar show up and catch O'Brien. However, instead of killing him, the Jem'hadar first kills his other soldiers because they're about to go crazy from the lack of the katracel white. So he wants them to give them a death in battle, and where they'd likely kill him, and he lets Bashir and O'Brien go. And also there's a side plot about Worf trying to interfere with Odo's investigation. Alright, so first, get into my personal experience with this episode. So, if you're watching my Voyager reviews, you know that I'd already reached the end of when I was recording episodes off the TV for Voyager, because ever since season 5 of TNG, I've been recording every single episode of Star Trek that came out and watching it over and over again when it first came out when I was a teenager. However, I do stop that practice really soon. I've already stopped it for Voyager. However, DS9 is going to be a little bit longer before I stop this practice. So this is an episode I had seen a whole bunch of times. I had it on VHS and would watch it over and over again. In fact, I remember once I made like a collection of all the Dominion episodes, and I showed it to at the time was my fiance, showed it to her when she first came over to America. I was like, this is the first Star Trek thing I've ever showed her. I was like, you want to watch Star Trek? Alright, I'll show you all the Dominion episodes of DS9. That's where you got to start with. But anyway, and this was on there. I also have a memory of watching this with my friend. I think it was because we used to get stoned all the time. I think it was one of the nights that we didn't have marijuana or alcohol, so we were bored, and we were like, oh, let's just watch, it's an episode of Star Trek, I guess. And my friend, he was from Hawaii, so I wouldn't say go as far as to say he had an accent, but I always used to pick on the way he said the word both, because he would say both, kind of put an L in it, and every time he'd say, oh, I would do that both, or the both of you go over there, and I was like, it's both every time. And I was watching with him, and the Jem'hadar in this episode, Scott McDonald, who plays the lead Jem'hadar, says, take them both back to camp. So he does say both. And the other Jem'hadar responds with move But my friend was saying, oh, he's correcting him. He said both. He thought he was correcting us, take them both back to camp. Both. But he was actually saying move. But I think he was kind of picking fun at me because I always correct him. But that's just the way he says it. But yeah, apparently it's an accent thing because that actor, Scott McDonald, says it that way too. Maybe it's a West Coast thing. I don't know. But anyway, so let me start with the side plot. Let me get this out of the way. So apparently, I read somewhere that Worf was not in the first set of episodes because they wrote them before the studio forced Worf to join, and then so they had to retroactively go and add him to the plot. So I don't know what the side plot of this episode was originally, but apparently they changed it and made it have Worf, gave Worf a side plot, so he actually had something to do. And I think this makes sense. Like, and I remember when I first saw that, I was like, no, this is logical. I think you almost need this plot because the audience is so used to seeing Worf as the chief of security, but Odo is the chief of security here. He's the strategic operations officer, or whatever the hell that means. And so I think it made all the sense in the world that he would have a harder time adjusting to it. And also we, the audience, would have a hard time adjusting to seeing Worf as not the security chief. But it also highlights the difference between TNG and DS9 and how DS9 has more to do with shades of gray. You know, that's even what Sisko tells Worf. I mean, they did this plot before with the Starfleet security officer kind of critiquing Odo and the way he does things. They did this twice already to do with that Constable Odo guy who was in season 1, who was in Move Along Home, the best episode of the show. And also Eddington in season 3. But I don't think they're repeating it because it's not simply, oh, you need to do things the Starfleet way. It's more about Worf adjusting to life on DS9 and adjusting to his new role where he's not the security chief. So I liked it. I think it made sense. However, I do have an issue with the fact that Odo didn't tell Worf. Now, I know so they tried to explain or make an excuse as to why he wouldn't do it, because Worf even says, Odo, why didn't you tell me what you had planned? And he's like, I don't advertise my when I'm doing an undercover mission. Alright, so we'll hold there. He does say more, but I want to address this first. Worf is a fellow officer. He's not a rando off the street. It's not like Rom or Morn. He is a high up chief of operations. No, sorry, he's a high up Starfleet officer. He's in the senior staff, like you are, Odo. So, telling a member of the senior staff of what your undercover operation, what you're planning, is not advertising it. For example, in the Circle, Odo's going undercover on a Cardassian ship, and guess what? He tells Kira and Sisko, who are senior officers just like him. In fact, I think he tells all the senior officers he's about to do it. And there's other times we've seen him run undercover investigations on Quark, and guess what? He fucking tells Kira. So this, I do not buy at all. This is total bullshit. I don't advertise. Telling Worf would not be advertising it. So I dismissed that right away. However, the other thing that Odo says is, plus, and you're snooping around kind of, helped my investigation, threw them off or whatever. Here's my problem with that. Since Odo knew that Worf was snooping around, he should have realized the possibility, and should have realized it was a strong possibility, that Worf would try to apprehend the smuggler guy and Quark himself. Worf pretty much said that. And so Odo should have predicted this. He's a good security chief, which we have seen in episodes like Necessary Evil and Improbable Cause. We see that he's the top-notch, best sort of investigator and great at like deduction and predicting what people will do and stuff like that. So this is out of character for him not to know that at the very least it was a strong possibility of Worf. So he should have foreseen this. In fact, when Worf shows up and he's like, Odo, what are you doing here? And he's like, I could ask you the same thing. Actually, then you suck at your job because you shouldn't be surprised that Worf is there. It's obvious. Like, I was just watching the show, and I'm not a freaking detective, and I could figure out that that Worf is going to show up. So those excuses they try to come up with I dismiss them. They do not excuse it. The fact of the matter is that they wanted to have a plot with Worf, interfering with Odo's investigation to show that he's having a hard time adjusting to life on the station. In actuality, Odo would have just told Worf. When Worf was going around asking Quark about Quark and the smuggler, Odo would just say, look, I'm running an undercover investigation, so if you interfere, I don't even want that guy, I'm trying to get the higher-ups. Because, he's said shit like this to Sisko and Kira before. You might say, oh, well, they're his superiors. So's Worf. Worf is a higher rank. Worf is like third in command of the station. So, it's like the second officer, pretty much. In fact, at this stage, they consider him the first officer as far as the defying goes, but that will change a bit later. In some ways, they kind of sort of... but that's another story. Like, I think Nana Visitor was a bit worried about her job, and I think she was right to do so, because at the beginning, they were kind of playing Worf off as the first officer, but later, they went back to, no, Kira's definitely the first officer, which I like. But anyway, so, point is, Odo should have fucking told Worf, and the fact that he didn't was plot contrivance and nothing more. But other than that, I do think this is an interesting storyline. So, let's get to the real storyline, the A-plot, the meat and potatoes of the episode. So, I love it. I love this A-plot. I think it's really powerful. First of all, Scott McDonald is an amazing actor. And I think I mentioned this episode before. Like, he always gives a really good performance. He's one of my favorites reoccurring guest stars. So if you don't know who he is, he played Nevek in the episode Face of the Enemy. And when I reviewed that episode, I talked about what an amazing job he did. Like, he was really good in that episode. And also, he played... Commander Dullum, I believe his name was, who was the main Xindi reptilian adversary in the Season 3 arc of Enterprise. So he was in several episodes. He was pretty much the main villain of Season 3. Unless you count the spear builders or whatever. But he was more of the face of the Xindi as bad guys. And he did a good job there too, but I actually like his performance in Face of the Enemy and this episode better, because as much as I love the Xindi arc, he was a little bit mustache twirly, but here he plays a very complex character and does it. Oh, he was also Tosk. I forgot to mention Tosk, of course. Tosk was good too, but I think this and Face of the Enemy are his best performances. But yeah, no, he does a damn good job, and he must not mind heavy makeup, because all those roles, like the Romulan is probably the least amount of makeup. All the other roles are like heavy makeup. But anyway, Oh yeah, and he was on Voyager in the pilot episode playing that was the only time we see him as actually a human without makeup. He was playing a random Starfleet officer who must have died because he never appeared. Like, he was in command of the bridge on Voyager, and then we just never see him again. but anyway, I mean, they should have mentioned, oh yes, this is Rawlings, I think his name. Rawlings died on this planet. It happened off screen. But anyway, or they could do a Carrie thing and just bring him back in the penultimate episode of the show just to kill him. But anyway, sorry. It's Voyager bullshit. But anyway, no, Scott McDonald's a great actor, and I think he does a really good job here. And I love how complex and, like, shades of, because some people point out that the side plot is all about how DS9 is shades of gray, and then the A plot is like a giant shade of gray. So it's kind of like explaining, like, kind of meta sense, explaining the A plot of the episode. And I think it's common for D Space Nine to do these kind of shades of gray episode. Not a stupid cheesy flashback, but I'm talking about moral gray. Sorry, but it's but no, it's so I like the way that it deals with no right and wrong answers, and I've heard different people side with different people. With either O'Brien or Bashir. I think I'm going to read a Patreon comment later where someone sides totally with O'Brien. I actually side with Bashir on this one because just forgetting about, like, morality or anything from a strictly strategic standpoint of wanting to defend the Federation from the Jem'hadar, helping a rogue group of Jem'hadar who want to defect from the Dominion, and plus the leader has shown, like, resistance, like he's beat the brainwashing, and he's realizing that the Jem'hadar are slaves to the Dominion, and plus he got a whole, like, group, a whole, like, ship full of Jem'hadar to go along with him. So he convinced them that it was in their best interest to leave the Dominion. You know how much potential there is there? Like, if Bashir was able to spark, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like you compare it to Damar, and I'm going to spoil the final season, but I'm sure you've seen it. I'm spoiling everything. But anyway, in the final season of DS9, there's Damar has his resistant group. Now, Bashir is in the case of saying, yes, let's help Damar, because if they can fuck up the Cardassian Dominion Alliance, that will be good for us. And O'Brien would be like, no, fuck Damar. He's an asshole. He's probably going to kill us, so just let him die. In other words, the wrong thing to do. And I think it's the same thing here. That, yeah, forgetting about morality or anything, that strategically it would be wise to help these rogue Jem'hadar, because they could definitely fuck up the Dominion. Now, one of O'Brien's arguments against that is like, well, you don't know that they're going to do that. They could end up, like, becoming a worse enemy and becoming more reckless. But his logic is flawed, because he's not basing that off of anything, whereas opposed to Bashir is basing his judgment of the Jem'hadar by actually talking to him and seeing firsthand that he is, like, questioning the Dominion and their rule and their way of life, and would actively want to challenge it. So, I think Bashir was 100% in the right. In fact, I recently, from my viewpoint, I don't know when you're watching this video, but when I released it, I recently released a video called Star Trek What If, where I went in and did, like, the what if parallel universe scenarios, like the What If Marvel show, where I came up with, like, what if scenarios for Star Trek. And the one I did from D Space 9 was, like, The Adversary, just because I just watched that episode and it was fresh in my mind. But I thought of a better one for this episode, and that is, what if Bashir actually solved the problem with katracel white? What if they actually broke? What if Bashir broke the Jem'hadar's addiction? So what if O'Brien actually decided not to be a dick and didn't disobey orders and actually did help Bashir to try to find a cure? And what if Bashir actually did find a cure? And so the Jem'hadar the Grenagar, as we know, I think that's his name, but the lead dude, Scott McDonald, he would let Bashir and O'Brien go because we see firsthand that he's like an honorable man and actually would be true to his word. And he lets Bashir and O'Brien go. Meanwhile, he has a group of Jem'hadar and a cure of katracel white, and so they slowly infiltrate the Dominion and start recruiting more and more Jem'hadar and breaking them free of the addiction. And eventually, it breaks out into a civil war between the two different factions of the Jem'hadar, fighting each other, and the Dominion kind of falls apart of it and gets really weakened, and it's like the founders try to like breed more Jem'hadar, but at the same time Grenagar and his team are recruiting more of the Jem'hadar to his side, and it's kind of like it would be like an analogy between the rebellion and the Empire from Star Wars, whereas like it's easier for a resistance, it's like inevitable for a resistance to thrive, and once it started, that it would thrive and be a cancer to the Dominion, and eventually they would overthrow the founders. And by eventually, I mean after like a decade or two. And so, what this would mean for the Starfleet, or Federation in the Alpha Quadrant, no Dominion war. In fact, there would be no Dominion threat, period. They would not have to worry about the Dominion at all. They could try to get back to solving the peace issues with the Klingons and the Romulans and sort things out, and there would be no Dominion war. Millions of people wouldn't die. And then eventually, once the rebel Jem'hadar win, they've been shown to be reasonable if they're not addicted to the katracel white, so they would do a peace treaty with the Federation. In fact, they might pre-arrange a peace treaty with Starfleet and Alpha Quadrant forces in exchange for like weapons and help against their fight with the Dominion and like funding or whatever. And so Starfleet and the Klingons, Romulans would fund the rebel Jem'hadar and help them take over the Dominion, and then they would have a peace treaty and trade and whatnot. And I don't know, some people may think I'm being pie in the sky, but based off the way this character acts, I think absolutely he would be true to his word, and absolutely they would maintain peace with the Federation. So that is my what-if scenario, and that's also my way of saying Bashir was 100% correct. However, the counter-argument is that it's probably more likely that Bashir wouldn't be able to find a cure, and that all the Jem'hadar would just die anyway and kill him or whatever, or maybe Grenagar would let him go just like he did in this episode. But that would probably be more likely, but let's say in the unlikely scenario, Bashir actually, which is why it was wrong for O'Brien. Like, it was just strategically wrong for O'Brien to do this, because that could have fended off the war. Rather, he should have been more worried about stopping a war with the Dominion rather than just saving his own ass, or Bashir's own ass. And don't make jokes about how O'Brien likes Bashir's ass. I'm just saying. Yeah, they did have that exchange at the start of the episode where O'Brien was like, are you complaining about Keiko and how she didn't understand that he put the workshop in his quarters? And Bashir's like, no, actually, it makes a lot of sense. It's actually, if anything, it shows how much you love her because you miss her and you want to spend time on the places intimate to her. And he's like, yes, of course. Why can't Keiko be more like? And he's like, more like, well, a man. And he's like, so you wish Keiko was a man? And he's like, I wish I was on this mission with someone else. So I have an issue And I might be being sensitive, PC or woke or whatever the fuck insults you want to call. But I couldn't help it because I think maybe from a modern perspective, that scene comes off as Bashir going, "Oh, you're gay, O'Brien? You're gay! You're gay!" Which shouldn't be, like, because he was joking. "Oh, you wish you was like a man. Ho, ho, ho. What are you up to, you freak?" Like, I get that impression. And that's not okay. Not okay with that. So, yeah, I don't know. As you say, might be being just too overly sensitive in that regard. But getting back to Jem'hadar, which I believe is his name again. All the Jem'hadar have like really complex, like hyphenated names, so it's really hard to remember them all. But there was a series of novels. I talk about it a lot because I like these novels. I actually think, well, they started out good and then they turned to shit. But that take place after Deep Space Nine finishes, and there's a storyline where Odo sends he's like still in the link, but he sends a Jem'hadar to live and work in the station and to specifically learn from Major Kira. So he becomes kind of like a sort of apprentice to her in a way. It's very similar. It's like basically doing the same thing they did with Voyager with 7 of 9, but instead of a Borg, it's a Jem'hadar. And I think that's actually a really interesting concept. And the reason why I bring it up is because that Jem'hadar was also born free of the katracel white, and he was like 20 years old, which, as we know, is like way beyond the expected lifespan of a Jem'hadar. And because of that, he was more open-minded, which again, as established in this episode, that they're more open-minded and more willing to sort of resist the Dominion because of that. And that's why Odo chose him. And he became like a regular character in the series of books that they did before it went to shit. Yeah, because eventually, like, he went crazy and tried to kill Ro, who was the security chief, and then I think Kira, maybe he tried to kill Kira too, and someone else went chasing after him. I don't remember. It was a long time since I read it, but it turned out that he was being manipulated by the Intendant from the Mirror Universe, but it wasn't actually the Intendant. It was Eliana, what's her face from Second Skin, like the person who impersonated Kira. She ended up in the Mirror. I don't know. It was convoluted. That's when this books turned to shit. But until before that point, it was a really interesting character. But it was definitely referencing this episode heavily. And also, it kind of, again, it's not canon, but it's kind of affirming that Jem'hadar, or whatever he's called, was born that way. So in the episode, he thinks it's the planet or the food or something on the planet. That's why he took him back to the planet, and he was trying to Bashir to study the planet. But Bashir's like, well, what if the planet had nothing to do with it, and you were actually free from the Jem'hadar, from the katracel white from birth? You were just taking it unnecessarily, and once you stopped taking it, you were just fine. And so I think the novel sort of reaffirms that, but again, it's not canon, but that makes sense anyway, even if you disregard the novel. I think that the episode itself is saying that is the most likely scenario. Now, I do, even though I disagree with O'Brien, I love the ending where O'Brien actually defies orders. Like, that was very powerful, especially to see these two friends. And Bashir was was passionate about, helping these Jem'hadar because it was strategically the correct thing to do, but also it was the right thing to do morally, and Bashir defied his orders and destroyed his work. Not Bashir, O'Brien. And so that was very, very fucked up. And so, but it was interesting. O'Brien's excuse, his reasoning is, it's because I didn't want you to die. And so, again, it's really complex, like Shades of Grey in that case. And I don't know. I feel like, though, that Bashir should have been more angry at O'Brien, because I would be, because he just fucked everything. He might have doomed the Federation by doing this, just to save Bashir's ass. Again, no jokes about that. but so the one thing I didn't like was how when Bashir's like, oh, this is supposed to be our dark game tonight, and O'Brien's like, don't worry, I'm not in the mood either. And then Bashir goes, well, maybe in a couple days. And O'Brien kind of just like, just doesn't really respond to that. I didn't like that. I think it should have been written that O'Brien should have been the one who said maybe in a couple days. I think Bashir should have been too upset with O'Brien at that time to even consider that. He could have been, because, and also I'm not really a big fan of Bashir saying, when O'Brien's like, oh, you can report me, and Bashir's like, oh, that's not really my style. I don't really buy that either. Your style, the fact that he like destroyed your work, is not your style. To like, what are you gonna do? Lie in the report? Is because you're gonna have to write a report about it. So is lying about it in order to protect this asshole who defied your orders, is that your style? I don't think that's your style. I think it was just, again, another contrived way for the writers to not have O'Brien get court-martialed out of Starfleet. Just be, oh, well, it's just not my style. Like, that's bullshit. Of course it's your style. Whatever. But it was still, I still liked the complexity of having these two friends be at odds with each other. I wish they would have played it longer and not hit the reset button. Again, it gets back to Bashir saying, oh, maybe in a couple days. Like, if anything, O'Brien should have been the one that said maybe in a couple days. But anyway, still a really great episode. I love the complexities about the whole situation, and the intense of O'Brien and Bashir being at the mercy of these Jem'hadar the whole time. And my favorite thing about this episode, season 4 episode, it's about the Dominion and not the fucking Klingons. However, that being said, they do have to throw in, like, this is what I'm saying, these season 4 episodes, even when it's not about the Klingons, they have to throw in one scene of Worf saying, oh, the Klingons are attacking here and doing this, and we have to keep an eye on them. So they have to remind you, the Klingons are the bad guys. Now, even though this episode's about the Dominion, we really want you to focus on the Klingons, so fuck that. I still hate that shit. But anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neal House and Jordan Johnson. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Alessandro Miglasio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, I have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I finally left this cliff edge that I was on for the last 2 weeks, and then I wandered into a forest. If we didn't have the episode with the baby Jem'hadar, I would have agreed with Julian. However, Miles is right about the Jem'hadar, as they are programmed to be killers. Garanagar, I have been saying it right. Garanagar is a unique Jem'hadar, as we never see anyone like him again on the show. The big question is, would Miles O'Brien be this hard heartless if it came to the Cardassians, Romulans, or even Klingons. I would say he would be 50-50. If he wasn't on Deep Space Nine, I'd say it'd be more like 20-80. Different shows, same old Worf, as he would be a terrible security officer on Deep Space Nine. Worf stopped being a crap security officer and tried to be a father to that son you disowned. At least Worf got something right, his relationship with Dax. So my rating is 9. Worf really needs a Klingon friend to play with. In season 5, he will get his wish out of 10. Well, that's what I'm saying. They should have done that from the beginning instead of making the Klingons villains. But anyway, don't get me started on that. So, as far as you thinking Miles is right because we learned that the baby Jem'hadar, or, the episode with the baby Jem'hadar, we learned that Jem'hadar were programmed, and in that episode, the Jem'hadar couldn't be convinced to be turned by Odo and went off and said to go fight with the other Jem'hadar. First of all, I don't like that episode. Not the episode. The episode's fine, but the ending of the episode, I don't like what that has to say. But regardless of whether or not I like it, it's part of canon. However, my counter-argument to that would be, alright, so we agree that Granagar is different. That he doesn't have that undying devotion to the Founders, and that he would be willing to defy them and start a rebellion. But your argument that he's the only one, he's unique, and we never see another Jem'hadar like that again, barring that be canon books, of course. It's not canon, so I will agree we won't include that. But you seem to be forgetting there was a whole group, a whole team, a whole ship full of Jem'hadar that was willing to defect with him. And none of them were free of the White, which was the whole point of the episode. They were trying to get free of the White. They were trying to defect from the Dominion. They were trying to disregard the Vorder's rules. They believed in Granagar, and they were following him. So I disagree with the whole pre-programmed thing, because this episode shows us that they can overcome the program. And I'm not even talking about Granagar. I'm talking about all the other Jem'hadars who were with him. Now, eventually they turn on him, but that's because they're all dying from the White. And because you could argue, he defied his order to keep O'Brien alive. But at that stage, he was like 1 day away from dying of the White, so he was already starting to go crazy with the White. If Bashir succeeded and did get them free of the White, then that wouldn't happen. He would go along with the Jem'hadar, with Granagar, because we've shown that there are. In fact, later in the season, there'll be another episode that kind of tackles Rebel Jem'hadar, or to the death, although these ones apparently were more violent and more of a threat to the Federation, but if you believe Wayun. But we do see that there is a desire to defect from the Dominion even outside this group, and Granagar 100% could take advantage of that. So that's why I think Bashir was right, 100%. And O'Brien probably doomed the Federation to die, doomed all those millions of people to die in the Dominion War by doing this. But that is just my humble opinion. And so anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Hippocratic Oath, more like Hippocratic Oath. I like this episode despite the fact that it makes me say Noth. It's a good ethical dilemma episode, and I like how it explores O'Brien's propensity for racism, which we see more of later in the series. Also, Worf feuds with Odo because Worf isn't in Starfleet anymore, and he don't like that. Also, the episode is directed by Renee Auberjonois, who, despite directing it, is also in this episode. When playing a classic RPG, you can usually restore your HP/MP by staying at an N. Okay, bye. So I responded to this comment and came up with my own rhyme for this episode because I thought of one. So my rhyme was Hippocratic Oath, more like sycophantic oaf. And I gotta be honest, I think I like mine better than yours. I think mine's better. I guess it's, in this case, the episode would be about J.D. Vance. Sycophantic oaf? No, okay. Yeah, so O'Brien being racist, that's interesting. We definitely seen it before this episode. I think it was most showcased, well, on the Wounded, the first Cardassian episode, because when he blows up at the Cardassian just for asking him out to a drink, Jesus Christ. And then he was like, oh, why do some people still have feelings about it? And it's obvious he did. So not only is he racist, he's completely oblivious to the fact that he's racist. But then it's brought up later in the episode, Cardassians, where he was like being totally racist to the Cardassian kid they were looking after. And yeah, so he's like super racist towards Cardassians. I don't know if this had to do with racism, because as much as I don't agree with Stephen Kennedy about O'Brien being right, he does make a good point about the episode that introduced the baby Jem'hadar, that we know that they're killing machines and they're pre-programmed to do so. So O'Brien, by being scared of the Jem'hadar and dismissing him as pre-programmed killing machines, kind of based more on, it could be said to be based more on logic. Now, it could be based in racism, but there's no really evidence for that. Like, it could have just been based on logic, like a logical conclusion of what they know about the Jem'hadar. So I don't know if I'd say this episode's really about his racism, but it could be. Like, that could be a valid interpretation of this episode. But especially because of the fact that we have seen O'Brien being racist in other episodes, even before this one. So, anyway, next comment is, well, it's more, by the way, I should specify, it's actually more speciesist rather than racist, but tomato, same thing. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, this is the third time Odo gets in a conflict with the Starfleet security officer, so the B-plot is not very original and brings down my rating of the episode. I only liked how they showed Sisko's interest in ancient clocks again and how he backs Odo. The A-plot was great with excellent dialogue and a strong dilemma, although I don't really buy that Garanagar's attitude differs so much from the others just because he doesn't take the white anymore. This episode shows the difficulties of having friendships between employees of different ranks when conflicts arise, something that probably many people experience in their work life, including myself. So my rating is an 8 out of 10. Oh, hell yeah, I experienced that before. Now, as far as Garanagar, I don't think it's just that he stopped taking the katracel white. I think if we believe Bashir's theory, I think it's because he was born without needing the white from the beginning, from his whole life. So I don't think it's something that just happened. I think his change of attitude actually does make tons of sense. And again, not only did he change his attitude, he convinced other Jem'hadar to change their attitude as well. So I don't know, I buy it. I think it's a very interesting plot device. Now, as far as the B-plot being unoriginal, I already addressed this, where I actually don't think it's too much like the Eddington or the Goofy Guy storyline. I think it's different because it's less about, oh, Odo sucks and he should be removed, and more about Worf just adjusting to life on the station and trying to realize that he's not a security officer anymore. And plus, getting back to my complaint about the storyline, it's like the trope, it's the cliche of things that could have been solved if you just talk to each other. And don't give me this shit about, oh, I don't tell people about my advertise about my undercover things. No, you tell your senior officers that you fucking work with who know how to keep classified information. Damn it. But anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, 2 sets of main characters in major conflict in this episode. Something TNG probably wouldn't be allowed to do. This is also a good Jem'hadar episode, but I still like Rocks and Shawls better. It's difficult to choose a side between Bashir and O'Brien. My heart says Bashir, but my head says O'Brien. I think the end, when they say they don't feel like playing darts right now, but you can tell they're still friends and it will just take some time to get back to normal, is a good way to end the episode. See, I don't know. I disagree with that perspective of my heart says Bashir and my head says O'Brien, because my head says Bashir too, because as I was just going through, I think it's strategically it's the better move. Just forgetting about the morality and the heart of it or whatever, that could actually do a lot more to protect the Federation. I'm just saying. Now, as far as Rocks and Shoals, I guess you could compare them just on the basis of being Jem'hadar episodes. They're kind of on par to me. I don't know. I can't really choose one. Maybe I would choose Rocks and Shoals. I don't know. They're both really good. I always compare Rocks and Shoals more to the episode The Ship. And I think Rocks and because they seem very similar. It's almost like Rocks and Shoals was redoing the plot of The Ship, but Rocks and Shoals is way better than The Ship. Like, that's an easy choice. But anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, so while Lisa Klink is most known for several Voyager episodes, such as the Omega Directive, I believe this is her best authored script. Here in DS9, she actually carefully and cleverly takes one of the best friendships in Trek, Bashir and O'Brien, and puts them to the test, going against the Roddenberry box. And actually have 2 at odds of each other in this wonderfully written episode as to whether the Jem'hadar could be liberated and make a difference in the current Cold War with the Dominion. Bashir and O'Brien have also been 2 characters always aligned with Starfleet, one in the officer's position and the other enlisted, and it goes well with O'Brien likely being correct, as it appears what's going on with the Jem'hadar is a genetic anomaly rather than something that can be harnessed with the rest. Still, it's interesting that O'Brien assumed he got fired at the end, but the test of their friendship prevails. Yeah, there's a strange line in the beginning that got /fiction writers overcharged as to whether O'Brien likes being around Bashir than with Keiko. Interesting enough, it wouldn't even be the last time this comes up in the series, but other than that, a wonderfully crafted episode. I'll give it 9 out of 10. So I don't know if I concur with your conclusion that Bashir definitely couldn't find a cure because it was a sort of genetic anomaly. He could still find a way to duplicate that genetic anomaly. Like, in fact, once he knew it was a genetic anomaly, like, that would put him on the right track. In fact, right before O'Brien destroys his work, Bashir outright says, I'm close to finding a cure, which is why he refuses to go. Now, whether or not that's true, like, maybe he just thinks he's close, like we'll see later in the season with the quickening, like he thinks he can just solve it simply, but fails miserably, and maybe that would be the case here. But I think there's a just as equal possibility that, especially if you put in the genetically enhanced bullshit, but let's not do that. But there's an equal possibility that he would in fact be able to duplicate this genetic anomaly and duplicate it for the rest of the Jem'hadar and essentially find a cure for katracel white. Like, he could sample Grenagar's blood and see what exactly it is, and apparently he says he was close, so I believe him that he was close. But that's so just I just don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Bashir would have failed. I think there's a pretty equal possibility that he would have succeeded. Now, as far as Lisa Klink, you mentioned her once before in a comment of my other videos. I'm not familiar. Like, I'd never even heard her name until you brought it up. So I'm not familiar with the episodes that she wrote, but this is a damn good episode. I might have to look up which one she wrote. Omega Directive was not it's not a terrible episode, but it's not a particularly good one either. So I don't know. I would have to look up. Well, I'm not going to do it now. It's whatever. But if this episode's any indication, this was a very strongly written episode. I totally agree on that. So anyway, thank you, patrons, so much. Oh, wait, before I say one more thing, I gotta say, both Benjamin Mead and Norman Buckwald brought this up, the Roddenberry box, and how that wouldn't be allowed in TNG to do a conflict storyline like this between two Starfleet officers. 100%, especially not in the first 3 seasons when Roddenberry was still there. Oh, hell no. He would shoot that down with a vengeance. However, I think they would have been able to get away with it in season 6 or 7. Roddenberry wasn't around anymore. Rick Berman was getting a little bit more lenient, sorry. That's what I meant to say. And plus, they were too busy with Voyager, and this season 7 in particular was starting to get really dark. So I could totally see them doing something like this. And because you could argue, in fact, that the Pegasus is a little bit of two Starfleet officers, of Riker and Picard, at odds with each other because of the Pressman guy. A little bit. Maybe not to the degree of this episode, but I could see them doing something to the degree of this episode in season 7. But maybe season 6, but not before, especially not the first 3 seasons, or the first 4 actually, for that matter. Anyway, now thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Hippocratic Oath out of 10 is going to be a very, very strong 9. Excellent. Very close to giving this a 10. As one of the episodes I was going back and forth. Do I give it a 10 or do I give it a 9? And I don't want to give out 10s willy-nilly. And there are a few things that bug me about this episode that I brought up. The plot contrivances, particularly in regards to the B-plot. I don't think the B-plot's terrible. As I said, I actually think it's needed and I like it. But it's not great. It's not amazing, and plus it has that contrived thing at the end where Urdu says, "Oh, I don't tell everyone about my..." Yes, you do. You tell your fellow Starfleet your officers, your senior staff. So that's bullshit. So that bothers me. And there was also something about the main storyline that I found contrived. I was just talking about, but I kind of slipped my mind. And I think O'Brien's wrong. I think he is. But what I do love about this episode is that everyone can have their different opinions on who's right and who's wrong, and there is no definitive answer that the episode gives you. So no, it's an amazing episode. Great performances. I love Scott McDonald. It's so good. And the way they do the whole shades of gray, not only with O'Brien and Bashir, but also the Jem'hadar. You think they're the villains and they just want to kill people, but they're actually showing a more complex side to them, which is brilliant, which is why this is better than that episode Abandoned. I didn't like what the Abandoned did with the Jem'hadar. They're just killing machines and they can't be divorced. I'm I don't know. That's just, I don't think that's interesting to me. That's not good writing. Something like this that shows like Jem'hadar like realizing the founders are dicks and there's no reason to go to war with the Federation. Like, that's interesting, especially in the Grey Way, where they're still like threatening to kill O'Brien and Bashir constantly. Like, yes, this is interesting. It's powerful storytelling. Really liked it. Not quite a 10 though. Very close, but not quite there. Anyway, that is it for my review of Hippocratic Oath. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment below. All that sort of things help me out with the algorithm gods. And if you'd really like to support the channel, you could do so, just could, by supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below to that. I have different rewards for different tiers, such as pre-releases, a patron-only series of videos that I do exclusively for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews I've already made, and you can make comments I'll read in my videos or request a video for me to do and stuff like that that you could check out if you're interested. So let's see what's coming up on my channel. So this Saturday will be my review for Parturition, the Voyager episode, and then on Monday I'll be back with Deep Space Nine for my review for the episode Indiscretion, and then on Thursday, sticking with Deep Space Nine, it will be my review for the episode Rejoined. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.